So I'm here to talk with you today about a revolution that's happening in the workplace. It's a revolution in the way we work, in the way we learn, in the way we interact with each other, in the way we use technology. And it's a revolution that's happening because technology in the workplace, after 20 years of making us dumber, is starting to make us a whole lot smarter. And it turns out that makes a big difference. It's also a revolution that I've spent the last 7 years fomenting, and so I personally spent a lot of nights in hotel rooms, a lot of time away from my wife and kids, and I am so pleased that it is finally here. In order to explain this revolution, I need to tell you a little bit about my grandfather, which is an unusual place to start because my grandfather was a profoundly non-revolutionary kind of guy. He was a Southerner. We called him Granddaddy. He was a quiet man, a very modest man, in some ways a shy man, but he was the kind of man where if you paid attention and you listened to him and you watched him closely, you could learn quite a lot, and I did. He was a stockbroker for a boutique firm called Freeling & Company. A stockbroker, for those of you under the age of 40, a stockbroker is someone who buys and sells stocks on your behalf, because in the old days there was no E-Trade and no Charles Schwab, and you had to pay someone to do it for you. That's what my grandfather did, and he worked at a boutique brokerage firm called Freeling & Company in Chicago. And every year, we had a kind of a tradition on our visit to the big city to visit my grandparents. We had a tradition where my brother and I would come down to the office, and we would meet the brokers. So we would ride the bus down, or sometimes even splurge and take a taxi downtown. We would get in an elevator, ride all the way up to the 15th floor, which for a kid from Oxford, Ohio, was really a big deal. And the elevator doors would open, and we would see a room that looked something like this. It was one big room, and there were just 2 rows of desks, and at each desk sat a stockbroker. And my grandfather would take us around from one desk to the next, and we would stop at each desk, and we would shake hands with Mr. Freeling, and then we would go to the other Mr. Freeling and shake his hand, and Mr. Warsaw, and each one of them would tell us how much we'd grown since last year, what a wonderful grandfather we had, what nice boys we were, and so on. Now, towards the end of my grandfather's life, Freeling was acquired by a national firm, which was in turn acquired by an international firm. And this international firm moved Freeling's offices to its brand new, beautiful glass and steel skyscraper a few blocks away. And so now in high school, when I went for the annual visit to the office, I was escorted to an office that looked more like this. And it was beautiful. It was on like the 40th floor. It had panoramic views. There was original art on the walls. It was gorgeous. And I said to my grandfather, I said, "Granddaddy, you must really love this new office." And he looked at me, and in his sort of quiet, understated way, he said, "To tell you the truth, I can't stand it." I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, look, in the old office, a broker at one end of the floor would read something on the ticker tape or would get a call about an earnings announcement." And he said, you could almost physically watch that information as it traveled from one end of that floor to the other. He said one broker would tell another broker. It was overheard by a third broker, and he said within 2 minutes flat, that information could go from the first broker to the last, and we all knew what was going on as soon as any of us knew anything. He said, now we sit in our private offices, we call our clients on the phone, but really, we have no idea what's really going on out there. So, my grandfather was certainly no organizational theorist. He was no theorist of any kind. He had actually very little patience for theory. But he taught me in that one comment something very, very deep about interactions and the role that they play in the work that we do. Now, it turns out that actually a fair amount of work has been done on this topic, And roughly 70% of workplace learning, 70%, comes from informal interactions, like the kind that those brokers were having with each other when somebody learned something new. And what my grandfather made me realize is that when he moved into that private office, he lost that interaction ability. He lost that 70% of learning that came from being in the big office where everyone could sort of swim in the sea of information and knowledge and insight that was being generated by all of the different brokers in the office. So interactions are really important, and when we move to a private office, we lose them. Now, we've already heard a lot today about open offices, and that's a very good thing, right? Architects over the last 20 to 30 years have figured out that openness is a really important thing, that interactions are really important, and so they've designed increasingly open offices. When you go into an office building today, chances are you probably won't see many private offices. You'll see something that looks more like this if it's a tech startup, or maybe like this if it's a design firm. Interestingly, in the brokerage business, the Motley Fool has offices that look like this. I think they're pretty spectacular in part because, I don't know if you can notice, everything is on wheels. So people are constantly, literally rearranging the layout of the office depending on who they're working with and what they're working on. It's a much more dynamic environment, and again, it's designed to create these interactions. So far, so good. We don't have a revolution yet. But there's a catch. And the catch is that we don't work in the physical world anymore. So those of you who thought that you go into an office to do work, it turns out you're mistaken, because work has become disembodied. Our work now increasingly happens not with the physical people who surround us, or not with the people who surround us physically, but with an extended network of people that we connect with virtually. And so when you walk into offices these days, what you see is these wonderful open spaces, the sunlight streaming in, there's bright light, it's great, everything's open, and everyone is sitting in front of a computer. And they're all like this. In fact, some of them even have headphones, which drives me completely insane. And in this digital world, we don't have these wonderful architects, or we haven't had these wonderful architects creating open spaces. In the digital world, we're back in Granddaddy's private office. We're stuck in a private office paradigm. When I save a document to my hard drive, that document lives on my hard drive. When I send an email, I send an email to one or two people. Nobody else knows about it unless I copy them all, in which case they hate me for the rest of my life. So we are stuck in a world where, in the digital world, everything we create is very, very private, just like my grandfather getting that stock tip in his private office. Now, we can choose to share it with other people, but that's not the default. That's not the expected behavior. It's not the thing that the technology orders us to do. And so the private office paradigm means that we end up working in a way that is highly, highly transactional. We transact with each other more than we interact with each other. I send you an email asking you for a document. You send me the document. I submit a proposal to purchase something. Someone else approves the purchase. It's all very, very transactional. Now, don't get me wrong. Transactions are important. And transactional technology has done amazing things. We have systems that do a fantastic job of managing sales processes, purchasing processes, supply chain. I mean, it's extraordinary how sophisticated these systems are. But notice that what's happening is that the technology is getting smarter, right? So the technology is able to accommodate increasingly technical and complex processes. They can do wonderful reporting, analytics to tell you where things are stuck, where things are moving, who's a high performer, who's a weak performer, all sorts of great stuff, and it really is all great. But as the technology gets smarter, the people get dumber. And this is the part that I hate, right? It's like instead of thinking and interacting with each other, we increasingly just rely on this very smart technology to tell us what to do, and we transact somewhat mindlessly with each other. So this drives me crazy. This is actually the thing that made me 7 years ago start to get very excited about something that was beginning to happen in the consumer world, and that is social media. Right? So as there's been a very interesting thing happening, as the work world has been becoming more and more transactional, something very different is happening in the consumer world. If you just look at Facebook, Facebook has 1 billion users. Roughly half of those 1 billion are on the site on a fairly regular basis. Right? That is an astonishing number. Now, what are all those people doing on Facebook? They're coming to interact. They're coming to talk to other people. They're coming to share pictures with other people. It's completely the opposite of what's happening in the workplace. So interactions, not transactions, are what's driving this revolution in consumer social media. So the question that I have been wrestling with over the last several years is, how do we bring social into the workplace? What does that look like? How do we use these tools effectively so that people can become smarter, not dumber, using workplace technology, because they spend more time interacting with each other and learning from each other than they do transacting with each other? It's all about learning. Social in the workplace is really learning in the workplace. It's learning in the workplace in an era where we do our work online. Now, this is not such an easy thing to do, and I discovered that several years ago when I was with McKinsey Company, the consulting firm. We heard about this thing, Wikipedia, which was this online collaborative encyclopedia, and we said, wow, this is fantastic. We're McKinsey. We have tremendous amounts of proprietary knowledge. Wouldn't it be great if we could get something like Wikipedia at McKinsey and encourage people to use it? What on earth could we call it? We'll call it McKinseypedia. McKinsey people are not known for their humor. So we launched McKinseypedia, and everybody loved the concept. And so we got a lot of people who went on, like the first week, the second week, lots of people went on. They wanted to check it out. They wanted to contribute, but very few people actually did. And then we gave away like an iPod to get people to participate, and there was a big spike in participation, and then it trailed off. And then the French office gave away a case of champagne. And so there was another spike in activity, and then people stopped going. And what we discovered was this had nothing to do with the everyday flow of their work. Right? You can't just give people this shiny new toy and say, hey, here's this place for us all to collaborate and share with each other. Go forth and learn. And it turns out what happens is, well, what happened, which is not much of anything. So what we discovered is you have to integrate these tools into the everyday flow of work in order for them to become valuable. But when you do, they are incredibly valuable. So we have a company that I work with, Southeastern Railway. Southeastern Railway carries almost 600,000 passengers every day into London. They have long had a train alerting system that let everyone in the company know whenever there was a train that was delayed on the tracks. The problem was you didn't know why, and you didn't really know when it was going to be running again. And most importantly, you didn't know if you could help. And so what they did was they started funneling all these alerts through an enterprise social system where now when a train delay posts, people actually go online. And they have station managers explaining to the rest of the company why there's a train delay. Engineers will talk about the fact that there's a door that's jammed, and other engineers will jump on the network and say, I had that same jamming problem with that model of train. Here's what you need to do to get rolling again. right? It's astonishingly helpful. We have a company, Industrial Mold and Machine in Twinsburg, Ohio. You may not think of a manufacturing company in Twinsburg, Ohio as being on the cutting edge of technology and learning design. But let me tell you, they've done something very fascinating. This is a company that makes the molds that other companies then use to make things out of plastic. So they are mold manufacturers. Now, the mold manufacturing process for these guys is extremely customized. It's extremely specialized. Every mold is a little bit different from the ones that they've done before. And so there's a lot of tweaking and tuning that has to happen. But the challenge is it's a long production line. It's a long assembly line that these molds have to go through. And what they've done is they've got technicians at every station in that manufacturing process with iPads, with social software loaded onto those iPads. And they talk to each other as the molds go through. And they start to make comments to each other. People down the line will tell people further up the line how they need to change the process to conform to the spec or to remove bottlenecks in the process. The impact of that is phenomenal. So Industrial Mold and Machine reports that they've had a 20% increase in productivity with 40% less staff managed through attrition. And they've achieved it because the technology is there to make people smarter. When we interact with each other at work virtually, harnessing the technology, we become smarter, the whole system becomes smarter, everybody becomes more productive, and guess what the best part of it is? The work is just more interesting. And I'm thrilled that this revolution is here. I encourage you all to embrace it, and I'm only sorry that Granddaddy's not here to see it. Thank you.
Great.